Hi friends, Mindy here. I am going to be playing with this stencil today and some texture paste, and so I thought I would just turn my camera on and record in my little experiments here and take you along for the ride. So what I am doing, I have a little palette over here on the right, and I'm putting some acrylic paint down, and that is a Tim Holtz Distress crayon, and just adding some color to my palette. And then I'm going to go back through and add this modeling paste. This is the Light and Fluffy from the Crafter's Workshop. This is just what I have. You could use Liquitex or whatever brand that you have. I like the Light and Fluffy though, because especially for Bible journaling projects, it works really well, and it's pretty flexible, and it's not really heavy like some texture pastes can be. So you can see here, I'm just mixing this up here on my palette, and I'm going to be applying this to my stencil. Now, I believe that the stencil is sold out at By the Will for God, but this concept would work on any stencil that you have, really, in terms of just kind of coloring your texture paste and applying it through the stencil. I'm using this eggplant color, and I think the other one is called Penny, if I remember right. That's from Dina Wakley. And so I just have a palette knife here, and I'm loading up the texture paste on the back of the palette knife and then kind of smoothing it through. And I'm doing this section of the cross here first, and then I'm going to kind of work my way out. So this is not the most, precise way to work with a stencil, obviously. So, but I'm just kind of going in, taking my time and trying to add this texture paste only to this area where this cross is. If you load it up like from the back side of your palette knife and then kind of place it down, it works really well. Also, if you wanted to, you could use some washi tape and hold down your stencil, make sure everything is down. I'm just using my fingers. I'm not really sure. Sometimes I will washi tape them down, and other times I won't. I don't know. But once you kind of get some of the modeling paste going on there, it does kind of actually help hold the stencil down. I'm just trying to make sure I'm doing a nice even coat, and then just being careful not to kind of get up underneath the stencil. So just you want to be careful how you kind of scrape it across there. So I'm using this next color. This was a Distress crayon. I believe it was Spun Sugar, and mixed up with that same modeling paste. And then I'm just kind of going in around this like circle part around the cross. And you can see that it's a really, really light color. I am trying to create a little piece that I can use in my journal to match the devotional, and there's a very specific color palette that I'm trying to match. And unfortunately, this texture paste, when you're adding white to an acrylic paint, it's going to get lighter. I wasn't expecting it to kind of go this light though, so because the eggplant was a pretty dark color. The eggplant on its own is actually a really good match for the Tetelestai kit, but when I added it to the white, it just and then once it dried, it even becomes a totally different color. So but I had all this texture paste and I didn't want to waste it, and so what I end up doing is I'm just applying it exactly like it is, and I will deal with trying to make it match a little bit better later. At this point, I feel like it's going to match okay, but by the time it dries, it's really just not the right color. It's not the color I wanted anyway. So again, I'm just kind of going around now and filling in these extra parts and trying to be careful to not get this color where I don't want it, especially up onto the cross or whatever. And then I'm trying to kind of blend it into that area where the lighter color is. And then in hindsight, this would have been a little easier if I would have just moved the paper, but I was afraid that the stencil would move or whatever, and I end up kind of working that area a little bit too much, and I get some texture paste up underneath the stencil, but I will fix all of that later. For now, I'm just getting all of this texture paste on here. And one thing, I am working on black cardstock. This is just like regular scrapbook paper cardstock. It's not heavyweight or anything. And so anytime you're adding moisture to cardstock, it's going to try to buckle a little bit. And so that did start happening here. It wasn't too bad, but depending on the kind of modeling paste that or texture paste that you use, that might be a consideration. It might be easier to work on something that's, just a little bit heavier weight of paper. This is just what I had, and I wanted to use something that was black. So now I'm just kind of trying to mix in another little color that's kind of a secondary color. So I added some more white to that same Dina Wakley color just to try to blend it. It didn't really work. So I went ahead and just pulled up the stencil, and that is just going to sit there and dry while I'm working on this other experiment that I have going on. So again, I have the same stencil, and this time I'm just adding the modeling paste right to the stencil. I'm not adding any color or anything because I am going to be coloring this with some embossing glazes from Tim Holtz. So I'm trying to add a really even coat as best as I can. I also want to make it thick enough that it's going to be pretty well white because, the embossing glazes are translucent. So I want this texture paste to have a pretty good opacity. If I put it on too thin, you'll be able to see a lot of the black through it, which will affect, in the end, it will affect the way that the glazes look. So I'm trying to add enough to keep it nice and white looking, but not too much so that it's going to take forever to dry. So on that note, I just pulled up the stencil, and anytime you're working with this, you want to make sure you wash your stencil and your tools right away. Otherwise, it can be very difficult to get all of that the texture paste and stuff off of your stencil. So I'm going in now with I believe it is Antique Linen Distress Embossing Glaze from Tim Holtz. And I'm just applying this. This is my lightest color, kind of in the center part of this stencil area. And then I have picked another palette knife. This one just is a little bit smaller. And I am kind of picking it up onto the top of the palette knife. And then I'm just using my finger to tap it. And then kind of just letting it fall onto the stencil. So all of this texture paste is still wet. And it's going to allow this embossing glaze to stick to it. So I'm going in now with Vintage Photo on the cross part. I'm trying to make this look as dimensional and like wood as I can. So I'm going to go in with another color. So I have this Vintage Photo. I'm just going, and I'm applying it in the same exact way. I'm just kind of scooping it up and then just tapping it with my finger. And then I'll come in with my darkest color, which is Walnut Stain, and do kind of around, I'm trying to do, around the edges and just give it some more dimension. Now, this is a very imprecise process. So if you're looking for precision, this is not the way to go, because there were definitely some places that got a color that I didn't necessarily want, but in the end it looks okay, but there's not really a way to get it 100% perfect. So I'm okay with that. I like that look, so that's fine with me. But if that's something that you want, just know that this is not maybe the way to go in terms of like trying to add multiple colors to the same stencil. So at this point, I'm going to go in now, and all of the white space I'm going to cover with, I believe this is Salvaged Patina, I think, and just applying it a little bit more liberally over these white areas. And then very carefully with my finger, very gently, I'm just smoothing this around to get that embossing glaze kind of spread out into all of the white spaces. I'm okay if some white areas actually come through, because I want it to look more like a stained glass window and be kind of, have that translucent kind of feel to it. So I'm okay if it's not 100% covered, if it's not completely opaque, which is why, again, that I chose to use the glazes. So once I have everything kind of where I want it, I'm going back through with my palette knife and just kind of cleaning up some of these edges while this is still wet. And then I'm going to set this aside to dry. And I want to say it was probably a couple hours before these were dry. Sorry about the little camera shake there. A couple hours before they were completely dry. You can see that one on the right just kind of turned corally. And now I'm shaking off all of the excess embossing glaze. You could try to save that if you wanted to. It would just be mixed in with the other colors, and you could definitely save that if you wanted to. I just did not at this time. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with that one on the right and see if I'm actually able to match these colors okay. And now I'm heating up my embossing gun, and I'm going to melt this embossing glaze. And it's going to, you can kind of see it turn glossy and everything. And I really thought that this was completely dry when I started this, but you'll kind of see there's a couple sections that were not, I guess, where it was just a little bit thicker or whatever. And so they sort of bubble up, which is okay. And in a mixed media technique, actually, I really like that look. In fact, sometimes I don't even let the texture paste dry. I just kind of heat it to get that kind of bubbly look to it. That's not really what I wanted to do here, but I was able to kind of work with it. But there were a couple areas that did bubble up. So I will say, make sure it's 100% dry if you're wanting to do this technique. I was, I guess, just a little bit too impatient. So I heated that up, and then while it's still warm, you can see I'm just going to come through here and kind of push on it a little bit, and that's going to just flatten out those areas that bubbled up a little bit. So now I need to work with this page on the right. Well, not the page, the image on the right. And you can see I pulled in one of the papers that I'm trying to match, and I feel like the one on the left is going to be okay. It's not exactly the right color green, but it's close enough. But the one on the right obviously is just not the right color at all. So I'm actually going to go back to that eggplant, and I wanted to just kind of try this in one little section just to see if this was going to work. And so, and give me like the color and the coverage that I wanted. So basically I'm going to go through here and paint all of these little sections with this Dina Wakley eggplant color. This is the color. It actually matches the kit really well. And so I'm just going to go back through and paint all of these sections. And you might think it was going to take a long time, and it actually did not take as long as I thought it was going to. I won't make you watch me do this, but another option, if you wanted kind of more precise placement of your color and whatever, what you could do is just go ahead and do the whole thing in white, and then just hand paint each of the little sections if you wanted to. But this is how it ended up looking. I used the Dina Wakley in eggplant, and then I went back over the section with the cross in copper. I used a couple of paint pens from Posca to do the other colors, and then I went back through with a black Posca pen as well to go through the sections and just kind of clean up all of the edges. And I feel like that turned out much better. So this is a close-up of how that looks. If you liked this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. That just helps other people find my channel. And until next time, bye.